right, that's 10:02 here in Raleigh. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the third Thursday Web Forum for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or SECAS partnership. As always, I'm Hilary Morris, and I do user support for the Southeast Conservation Blueprint, as well as communications for the SECAS partnership. Today, I will be your host and your presenter, so bear with me. You'll be hearing a lot of my voice this morning. Here is our usual agenda. I'll start out by introducing our speaker. I've already done that. Then I'll present on the monthly topic today for about 30 to 40 minutes or so. We should have time for Q&A and discussion at the end. And then I'll wrap up by previewing next month's webinar and sharing a quick update from your SECAS staff. You've probably seen I am recording this webinar, and that's just for the couple of folks who inevitably wanted to come but had a conflict. I will post the slides, although most of it will be a live demo today, and link to the recording on the calendar event from the SECAS website within a day or two. So, and if you have trouble finding that at any point, you can always email me, and I'll be happy to share that with you. Any questions or comments before we get started? Okay, not hearing any, I'll go ahead and jump in. So I've already introduced myself. I'll be presenting today on some recent improvements to the Southeast Blueprint Explorer, one of our online viewers for the Southeast Blueprint, and kind of some of our overall efforts to ensure that the blueprint stays both useful and usable for the folks who are actually employing it to make decisions. So I'm going to give like a 1.5-minute long crash course on SECAS just in case we have some new folks in the room, but I'll blaze through it assuming a lot of you all are familiar and that's why you're here. So SECAS stands for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. It's a regional conservation partnership that spans 15 Southeast states, 2 U.S. Caribbean territories, and the surrounding marine environment. And SECAS was established in 2011 by the states of the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. It's co-led by all the federal agencies working in natural resource conservation in the Southeast. And we have representation from a handful of nonprofit organizations as well. That's really at the governance level, and at more of a grassroots level, we've had more than 2,500 people from 650 different organizations actively involved in the partnership or developing the blueprint. In a nutshell, what SECAS does is set a bold vision and an ambitious goal for what we want the conservation future of our region to look like. And that's really all about connecting lands and waters for the benefit of people and nature and improving the health, function, and connectivity of our ecosystems by 2060. Our primary product is the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. This is our living spatial plan, our map of conservation priority areas that shows where we can best work together as a conservation community to achieve that connected network of lands and waters that's called for in the SECAS vision. The blueprint identifies priority areas based on a suite of about 60 different natural and cultural resource indicators that represent terrestrial, freshwater, and marine systems. And then it's also based on a connectivity analysis that identifies corridors that span different climate gradients and connect coastal and inland areas. It's prioritizing about 50% of the landscape that is some shade of purple on this map. And importantly, we do update the blueprint every year. It's a work in progress. We're very open about that. And so we're always looking to update it to improve the quality of the data and ensure that it meets the needs of new partners. So if you want to access the blueprint data, I'm going to walk through a couple of ways to do that. We'll focus mostly on the Blueprint Explorer today, but we have 2 different online viewers and a download pathway. Before I jump into the live demo, though, I thought I would just provide a little bit of context on our efforts to improve the Blueprint Explorer over the years. We have been working on this viewer for 10 years. I realized looking back to prep these slides, I thought, wow, like this is kind of cool. And I'm going to share just some thoughts on some of the recent improvements and our underlying philosophy. So many of you may already know that SECAS as a partnership has very much embraced this lean startup method that we've borrowed from the tech world. And lean startup has a lot in common with adaptive management. It's kind of an intentional departure from a more traditional product development cycle where you spend most of your time in planning and development and trying to come up with the perfect plan, the perfect tool, and then you do a little testing and you release it. And adaptive management and the lean startup method kind of say, hey, what if we more live in that cycle of continuous iteration? And rather than working in isolation to develop what we think is the right thing, what if we employ and engage our whole community in deciding what is going to best meet their needs? And we just try to get through that loop. So what's kind of unique about Lean Startup is you're moving through that cycle with an emphasis on maximizing learning. So you're trying to get through it as quickly and as cheaply as possible so you don't waste time developing solutions that don't meet your users' needs. And we really apply this cycle of build and measure and learn to not only our Blueprint product, but also the viewers that we use to allow people to access that data. And so on the Blueprint side, this continuous cycle of iteration helps the Blueprint keep up with a changing landscape. We know that urban areas are growing and sea levels are rising, and we want the Blueprint to stay relevant and responsive to those changes. At the same time, we know the data that we have available to depict that landscape is also improving, and we want to make sure that we're always pulling in the best available science to describe what conditions are like on the ground. But perhaps most importantly, we want the Blueprint and its viewers to keep up with user needs, because if it's not relevant and helpful to the people who are actually using it day in and day out to inform resource allocation, to make decisions, to bring in new grant funding, then the Blueprint is not moving the needle for conservation. And so feedback from the broader community is really the fuel that powers our Blueprint revision cycle. And it's a huge reason why we've made a big investment in user support capacity. And so we have dedicated staff, and you're going to hear me plug our user support team a number of times today, who are available to help you use the Blueprint in your work, whether you would like a letter of support for a grant, you'd like us to make some maps for a conservation plan. We are available to help you because we know that increasingly folks in conservation are being asked to do more with less. They're strapped for time and for resources. And there are so many tools out there to navigate. So if we want people to be able to use the Blueprint in their work, we need to be able to be prepared to help them with that. And that's why we have user support available. It's also a reason why we really focus on the usability of our viewers, because we also want people to be empowered to use the Blueprint on their own without support if they would like to. And so we've borrowed a bunch of principles from the fields of user interface design and user experience to try to make our viewers as easy to use as possible. And a common example of bad design that folks in the UX field love to use are parking signs. So if your objective is to use these signs to figure out, can I park here today? These signs are not making it easy to do that. They're convoluted. At first glance, they maybe even seem contradictory. I can't park here ever at night, but unless I'm a truck, maybe I can unload on a Sunday, and then I can meter park for 30 minutes if I'm a commercial vehicle, but not on Sunday. Like, it's really hard to make sense of this. But what if we took a similar parking policy and translated it into a format that's actually understandable? We're going to use more of a calendar approach that people already have a mental model for, some pretty classic color coding that makes sense. Okay, I know whether I can park here today. And so we're trying to employ basically the same principle with the Blueprint. It could be the best plan with the best data in the world, but if we're presenting it in a way that doesn't make sense to anyone, it's not actually going to get used. And so we've been borrowing principles from these fields ever since the Blueprint viewer was first conceived 10 years ago, using techniques like paper prototyping to actually draw out with partners, what would you like to use this viewer to do? How do you envision interacting with it? And so this has shaped not only the origin of the viewer, but also our continued commitment to its improvement over the years. And so the last live demo I did for the Explorer was about 2 years ago on a web forum. And since then, we've done a round of user testing and made some improvements to the interface. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So this testing that we did was in the summer of 2023, and we tested with just 8 people across 3 different sectors. But one of the kind of guiding principles from the field of user experience says that you really only have to test with 5 people to catch 85% of the problems with your viewer. And so we've kind of adopted this, that multiple rounds of small group testing is the best way for us to find those low-hanging fruit problems that we can easily fix. We set these folks 7 different tasks in the viewer and observed how easily they were able to complete them. And we kind of asked them to narrate their thought process. You know, why am I clicking here? This is what I think is going to happen when I do, so that we could document their pain points, the places that they got stuck, and then go back as a staff and brainstorm ways that we can improve their experience. And kind of in a classic user experience approach, what we should have done is gone back and then tested again with our new solutions and see whether they do in fact work better. And I hope that we'll have time to do that in the coming Blueprint cycles. In response to that feedback, we made a number of changes to the viewer, and I will be walking through those in our live demo today. But the downside of a live demo is I can't show you what it looked like before. So I also wanted to show you this screenshot of one of the big changes that we made in response to feedback. Probably the mode in the viewer that got the biggest attention and ran into the biggest problems in our testing was filtering. And this is a mode that allows you to kind of find your part of the blueprint by narrowing it down to the part that aligns with your vision and goals using these filters on the left. And the previous interface, you adjusted your filters using these slider bars to select the range of values that you wanted to filter by. People found this super duper confusing and tended to get stuck in our testing. And so what we did is we updated it to more of a checkbox style approach, which is a lot more consistent with more e-commerce sites these days. So it kind of takes advantage of that mental model of what people are used to. And it also allows the filters to be a little bit more customizable because you no longer have to choose values that are contiguous in a range. You can choose just the low and the high if you want and really customize it to what you want to see. So with that background, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and do a live demo, because I think that will be the most interesting part of our day. And rather than going straight to the website, I'm going to start with Google, because let's be honest, that's the way most of us find things on the internet these days. So if I type in just Southeast Blueprint, the top search result is going to be the Blueprint page of the SECAS website. And this is always where I encourage people to start. The Blueprint page has a lot of great background information on the blueprint, as well as links to these three main pathways to access the data. So mostly today, we're going to focus on the Blueprint Explorer, and it says start simple because this very much is our simplest, easiest to use interface and the best place to start. It's intended to make it really simple to find how your area scores in the blueprint and why. And then it also does some pretty powerful things like generate reports. We also have this SECAS Atlas, which is an ArcGIS online hub site, and this link will take you directly to the page of our atlas dedicated to the blueprint, where every single layer that feeds into the blueprint has its own map service and a page where you can read more about how it was developed. So this is another great and really powerful resource, but not one that I'll spend a ton of time on today. The great thing about the Explorer and about the Atlas is that neither one requires a fancy software license or any special expertise in GIS. However, if you are more of a tech whiz and you just want to download the data and run with it, we do offer this data download pathway. These days, we're serving up 2 download packages. The top one is the main one that most people will need. It's all of the data for the Southeast Blueprint and the documentation. We do, however, now also serve a Caribbean-only download package that is much smaller in terms of file size. And we did that after some testing and polling with our Caribbean partners who said that download speeds are often an issue there. And if you're just working in Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands, it may not be the best use of your time or your hard drive space to have a bunch of data that only applies to the continental Southeast. So we offer both of those options now. But today we're here to talk about the Explorer. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in with the live demo. What I'll try to do today is just give you an orientation to the basic features. I'll demonstrate each of the main functions and what they do. And as we go along, I'll try to highlight what things have changed and why in response to our testing. So let's first start with the web address. The web address has changed recently. That was updated in the fall with the release of the latest version of the blueprint because we moved the Explorer to a different online hosting platform just to save money. So this doesn't really affect any of the functions, but if you are a person who has this viewer bookmarked, which is really exciting because that would mean it's such an integral part of your process, please update this link if you haven't already. The other thing I'll highlight off the bat here is we have this informational sidebar on the left. It's got some basic background information on SECAS, on the blueprint, and on this viewer. We also have a citation at the bottom that shows how you can reference this data in a proposal or a plan. And I have to give a shout out to Brendan Ward with Astute Spruce, who is our amazing software developer who's been building this viewer collaboratively with us for the last decade and has been wonderful to work with. We used to have a lot of additional information crammed into this sidebar, and that's a big thing that we changed in response to our testing. We used to have our location finder over here. We had instructions on how to use the viewer written out in the sidebar. And what we found is that people were having a really hard time getting back to this information once they'd moved forward with using the viewer to do particular tasks. And so what we've done is move that stuff out of the sidebar where it's available all the time, no matter what it is you're trying to do, because basically the sidebar real estate gets used to show information about areas that you select as you move forward with using the viewer. And so people were having trouble once that kind of got covered up. So moving right along to some of these things that have changed, this is the new location for the location finder now that it is no longer in the sidebar. And we have updated it to show, to have a much more comprehensive database of place names. So much higher likelihood that a place that you want to type in is now going to be recognized. It also now supports addresses, which it did not before. And just to kind of demonstrate this, I'm going to just type in New River Gorge because I was just there last May and I had just the most amazing time. It was so beautiful. And so what this is doing, I hit go and it zooms me into New River Gorge and drops a pin for the location of that point. I can hit the X if I want to get rid of the point and zoom back out. I'm going to be using the scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom today just because that's most convenient for me. But if you prefer a plus and a minus, that is available for you in the top right as well. Now we also offer now, this is another recent change, the option to search by latitude and longitude. And this is something that we did in response to requests from some of our marine users. It's a lot harder to navigate and get oriented in the marine environment because you don't have all these handy dandy landmarks on the base map. And so those folks often need to use coordinates to figure out where they are, especially if you're doing something like reviewing a wind lease, for example. And so we've added the ability to zoom to a particular lat long. And in a perfect world, we wish that we could have both of these types of searches in the same bar, but we weren't able to make that work technically. So you have to kind of switch using this drop-down arrow. So to go grab a lat long, I'm just going to use my favorite little trick from Google Maps, and I'm going to type in Grays Reef National Marine Sanctuary, which I know is right off the coast of Georgia. And it's got a point here that if I right-click the point, the coordinates come up, and I can click that to copy them to my clipboard. I'll exit out of this and just paste my coordinates into the location search and hit go. And boom, it zooms me right into Grays Reef National Marine Sanctuary coordinates and drops a pin, which I can again get rid of by clicking the X. Something else that I will highlight is instructions on how to use the viewer. As I mentioned, those used to be all written out in the sidebar and made it really long and scrolly. Those are now linked just briefly here and here from this button at the top. So if you click how to use this viewer, now there's a bunch of screenshots and much more in-depth instructions on how to use all of the features that I'll be going through today. So please feel free to refer back to that as a resource after this web forum. It opens in a new tab, so you can have it side by side with the viewer and refer to it as you move along. Down in the bottom right, we have our legend with the colors and the classes of the various priority levels in the blueprint. If as you navigate around, you find the blueprints kind of in your way and making it hard to see where you are, you can always hide it at any point. And similarly, you can change the base map to imagery if that helps you navigate. Today, I'm going to stick with gray and I'm going to turn the blueprint back on. We also have some links in our footer. This will take you back to the blueprint webpage where we started. And then there's 3 different prompts, basically to contact staff. All roads lead to either my email or the SECAS staff page. So you're welcome to just reach out to me. But this is essentially prompting you that, hey, if you'd like help using the blueprint, if you'd like to report a problem, maybe a custom report failed, or it was really glitchy, or maybe you have feedback on the blueprint itself, I think you could improve the priorities in karst areas, for example. These are just all prompts to reach out to your staff, and we really would love to hear from you. So that's kind of the lay of the land. I am going to start by demonstrating our main default mode within the Explorer, which is called Summary Data. So these 3 buttons at the top essentially move you between the 3 main modes of the viewer. And in response to user feedback, we have renamed these buttons to hopefully make them a little bit clearer what they do. We've also added this mouse over text. So as you hover over each button, this little bubble comes up and tells you what you might expect to do once you get there, and hopefully give you a sense of whether that mode will meet your needs. So as I said, when you load the viewer for the first time, it puts you into summary mode by default. And right away, I can see that I'm being prompted to zoom in to select an area. You might have noticed when I was messing with the location finder up here that it's would zoom you in and you'd see certain like boundaries come up on the map. That's what this was all about, because we were zooming in close enough that I was able to click on a summary unit. So let's look at what that's like together. I'm just going to head for a coastal area that'll kind of show you both the types of summary units that we have available. So as I zoom in, you see that these boundaries have shown up, and as I move my mouse around, you can see that it's highlighting whatever summary unit that I would select if I clicked on it. And in the inland areas, our summary unit is a 12-digit HUC sub-watershed. A HUC is just a hydrologic unit code, and the fact that it's 12 digits just means that it's a pretty small watershed. In the marine environment, your summary unit are these hexagons. These are 40-kilometer squared hexagons. And I wanted to highlight this because this is a change since the last time I did a live demo. The summary unit in the marine environment used to be outer continental shelf lease blocks. However, when we expanded the blueprint into the marine environment of the US Caribbean, which I will show you briefly, there are not outer continental shelf lease blocks identified in the Caribbean. And we wanted to be able to have a consistent marine summary unit that would work both in the Caribbean and over in the continental Southeast. So we kind of polled our partners and said, hey, like, is there another summary unit out there that we could use without reinventing the wheel? And what we stumbled on were these great hexagons that were initially identified by the EPA, and then NOAA sort of adopted them in one of their big projects that generates some of the data that goes into the Gulf blueprint. So you'll notice some of the areas in the Gulf blueprint have kind of this hexagonal pattern reflected in the priorities. And that's because some of the GOMAPS data for sea turtles and marine mammals, and hopefully in the future we'll pull in the marine bird data as well, has this hexagonal scale. And so you see that reflected in the priorities. So we thought, hey, this works pretty well because we have this good alignment with our summary unit and the spatial priorities in the Gulf. So to kind of demonstrate how summary mode works, I'm going to head over to coastal South Carolina near Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, because this is an area where I've done a use case fairly recently. And I'm going to select on this J-shaped watershed. So once I choose a summary unit, it gets highlighted in a darker outline. And now the sidebar starts updating with information about that watershed. So it's telling me the name of the watershed, how big it is. The priorities tab tells me how the different priority classes of the blueprint break down in this watershed, what percentage of the watershed is in highest and high and medium and so on. And then as I scroll down, it's also starting to tell me about some information underneath the blueprint so that I can't see on the map, but is driving priority. So this is telling me about the hubs and corridors, that 29% of this watershed is a hub and 16% is in the corridor class. I can click on the indicators tab, and now it's going to tell me what indicators, these are the underlying kind of data building blocks of the blueprint, are present in this watershed. Anything that's hyperlinked in blue and has a check next to it is present here. Anything that's grayed out is not. And if I want to learn about what this indicator is and how it scores, I can click on it. So let's say I'm interested in intact habitat cores, and this is telling me that 40% of this watershed scores as a large core, greater than 10,000 acres. We have some descriptive text about what this indicator is, how it's measured, and where the data comes from. This is telling me what intact habitat cores are, that they come from Esri's green infrastructure data. And then if I really want to dig into this data set, I can click to view this indicator in the SECAS Atlas. We sort of have this cross linkage between our Explorer and our Atlas. And this is going to take you to a page dedicated to that indicator where you can read more about it, why it was selected, what input data we used, the mapping steps we followed, and any known issues that we're aware of that the indicator isn't doing as well as it should. And then I can also view that particular indicator on a map. So I'm going to exit out of this. And then I'm going to take us over to this More Info tab. So this has undergone some pretty significant changes recently that I will highlight. What we used to have here were two separate tabs. One was called Partners, and it really had a bunch of information on protected lands. It was kind of intended to show you who else has an interest in this area that I might be able to partner with. And then we had a separate tab called Threats. And the Threats tab had kind of information on landscape change projections. We got some great feedback at one of our most recent blueprint workshops from someone who was actually using the threats data on our hub and stumbled on this layer that was kind of looking at renewable energy development pressure. And she said, I'm not sure I love the word threats for that layer because depending on your context, you might think of renewable energy development as a great thing, as a solution to maybe homegrown energy independence or to mitigating climate change. But if you're more concerned about biodiversity at that site that's now being covered in solar panels, yeah, you might think of it as a threat. So how you view these layers can be kind of context dependent. And we thought as a staff, you can make the same argument about urbanization. If you're working in affordable housing, you might not think of urbanization as a threat. You might think of it as a way to meet the needs of housing in a community. So we thought it would be better to just sort of take the value judgment out of this language. And so we've collapsed our partners tab and our threats tab into one new tab that's just called more info, because it's other info that's not part of the blueprint. And so now here you will find the things like urban growth and sea level rise and the protected lands information that you've been used to seeing. So here we have a great chart that shows past urbanization trends in this watershed based on the NLCD and future urbanization projections using the Futures Urban Growth data set that's developed by the Center for Geospatial Analytics at NC State. And this is the data set we've been using for several years now. No real changes, except that now this data has been officially published. It was just preliminary last time I gave this live demo. So we have fleshed out some of the links and citations here, and they've made a great map service for us that's available on the hub as well. Sea level rise, this hasn't changed much either. We're using NOAA's sea level rise inundation data. And if you want to learn more about it, they have a fantastic sea level rise viewer that you can check out. So as I mouse over, I'm basically seeing what percentage of this watershed is predicted to flood at high tide under various sea level rise scenarios. 0 feet is just current conditions at high tide. And then you see how more and more of this watershed is predicted to experience inundation as sea level rises. We have a new data set that we've just added in the last couple of weeks called Wildfire Likelihood. This comes from the U.S. Forest Service's Wildfire Risk to Communities project. And basically it's looking at the annual burn probability for each specific place within the continental United States due to wildfire. So what's the chance that this particular point is going to burn due to wildfire in a given year? And it presents those probabilities in two ways, kind of with a categorical word, and then also with a numeric percent probability. So we can see that generally in this watershed, mostly it has a moderate probability of wildfire that ranges from 0.02% chance to a 0.46% chance of wildfire in a given year. And then we have sort of the typical information that we've always had about protected lands. And we've just updated this to bring in the latest from the protected areas database. So nothing, that's about it for more info. I want to show you this little contact us button again. I hope you believe me when I say that we want to help you. That's why we've put like 7,000 links to contact us in this viewer. So if you ever are like, I could use some help at making sure I'm interpreting this data correctly, we are here to support you, and please reach out. If you're loving what you see in summary mode and you say, I would love to take this with me out of the viewer, you can using this handy dandy link at the top that says export detailed maps and analysis. And this will basically spit out a very detailed PDF report that shows maps and tables of all of the information that we just covered. I'm not going to do that right now because I'm about to show you that for a custom area. So let's leave summary mode behind. And I'm going to hop over to this button in the upper right that says upload a shapefile. And I think it can safely speak for the SECAS staff team when I say this is our favorite feature in the viewer because it has saved us hours and hours and hours of staff time. We used to have to do all of this analysis by hand in GIS, and now this is done automatically in the viewer. All you have to do is upload a shapefile or a geodatabase that's zipped up, compressed in a zip folder. And you can do that by just clicking and dragging your folder, and then you name the area however you'd like it to appear. And since we were looking at kind of the area around Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, that's what I'm going to run a report for here. This is a place that we were working on a spatial habitat management plan for this refuge a couple years ago. So I'm just going to hit create report, and that's going to run in the background while I go ahead and pull up the pre-made report that I've exported yesterday. So this is what a blueprint report looks like. It's telling me it's for the area as I named it. Here's our table of contents. Right off the bat, you can see the credits aren't until page 64. So this gives you a sense of the amount of information that is available in this report. As you scroll, you'll see a blank second page that says intentionally left blank. That is a placeholder for an executive summary that your user support staff would love to write for you. So we stare at this data day in, day out. And it's pretty easy and fast for us to skim through this report and go, here are the coolest, most noteworthy things from this report. And we'll write up this summary for you. And this can be super helpful if you just want to like grab some sound bites and drop them into a grant proposal or a plan. Let us do some of this heavy lifting for you. We would love to help. And frankly, even if you do use the blueprint independently, let us know that you did. And that's super helpful for us in understanding how people are using it in their work. We get great ideas for how to improve it. And it's also helps us kind of communicate the value of the blueprint in these viewers to show that people are using it. So I'm going to hop back to the report that I just made. We've got intro information on the blueprint. And then we sort of start with this format where we have a map and a table of each of the data sets from the viewer. So first we have a map of the blueprint in the Waccamaw River National Wildlife Refuge approved acquisition boundary. And then we have a table that shows how the blueprint priorities break down by acres and by percent within that area. Similarly, a map of hubs and corridors within the area and a table. Here's our table, that's our indicator summary. So this is very similar to what you were seeing in summary mode, where each indicator is hyperlinked to a specific page dedicated to that indicator. So maybe now I'm interested in seeing, let's look at one of our freshwater aquatic indicators. Let's go to natural land cover in the floodplain. So this is looking at kind of intact riparian buffers and showing that this scores super highly on this indicator. So I'm not going to walk through all the indicators because there's 63 pages of them. I'm just going to skim to the bottom and show this more info section. So this is again corresponding to what you just saw in summary mode. We have a map of urban growth projections in the area by the year 2060. You'll see we use the year 2060 a lot, and that's because it aligns with the timeline for the SECAS goal. So if you're not kind of sure what timeline endpoint to use, that's often one that we suggest. And so this provides kind of a more nuanced look at urbanization than what we were seeing in summary mode, where you can kind of see how the probabilities spatially vary within your area, and then see the predicted amount of that area that's going to be urban by various decades. And we've highlighted, again, 2060. These percentages often end up pretty small because the probabilities of urban growth in futures tend to be low, because it's saying we have a fairly realistic sense of how confident we can be that any given particular pixel will urbanize, but it's still really helpful at kind of telling you whether urbanization pressure is present in your area. And so to give you a little bit of a picture of that, we also offer these calculations below the table that say, okay, 1.3% is urban in 2021, and 20% of this area, it has at least a moderate probability of urbanizing by 2060. And then this tells you how the size of the footprint is predicted to increase over the 2021 baseline. The last one I really want to dig into is sea level rise, because there's some interesting things to interpret in the report. So this is using that same data from NOAA's sea level rise viewer and just showing the projected extent of flooding at high tide under various sea level rise scenarios. The darker the blue, the earlier that area is inundated as sea level rises. Here is our table that shows the percent of your area that is predicted to be inundated at each step. Keep in mind, NOAA's sea level rise inundation data is not linked to time. So it's not saying when we think 1 foot of sea level rise is going to happen. It's just saying when and if we get to 1 foot, here is what is predicted to be flooded at high tide, and mapping that for you. However, we know that time steps are sometimes really important for folks as they're thinking about sea level rise projections. And so what we've done is made a separate table using data from NOAA's sea level rise report that is linked to time, and basically tried to say, here is when we think this 1 foot of sea level rise, for example, might occur. And there are various emission scenarios, obviously, that will influence how fast sea level is rising and how quickly we might make it to some of these projected endpoints. So if I use that 1 foot example, I can look at this table and see that 1 foot of sea level rise could happen in this area as early as 2040. And then by 2060, even in the lowest scenario, we've probably already moved past 1 foot. So this tells me that 1 foot of sea level rise might happen somewhere between 2040 and 2060. So this can be a really helpful additional data point. Here's that wildfire likelihood layer that I just mentioned we recently added, looking at annual burn probability. That's pretty similar to what you saw in summary mode. And then we have the map of protected lands, essentially ownership categories, protected status, and a list of the protected areas that occur within your area of interest. This doesn't always appear for really large shapefiles. So if you upload one for a whole state, for example, the list of protected areas would be prohibitively long, so it gets cut off. But for this one, it's a pretty reasonable size, and we've seen the list of areas. And then here's our credits on the final page. So that's a crash course in a blueprint report. for a custom area. And while I was running my mouth, you see this is downloaded in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel it. But if I hit save, that will just save the file to my computer. So once I'm done with the report, if I want to go back to the main viewer, I can do that by clicking this link in the header, and that takes me back. So now I'm going to show you a second mode that I want to showcase today, which we call now view point data. We've again changed the name of this mode based on feedback from our user testing that people found this pretty confusing. We were calling it pixel mode. The intent is the same. It's really built to help you drill into the finest unit of the blueprint analysis and understand what's driving priority in that area. And the finest unit of the blueprint analysis is a 30 meter by 30 meter pixel. If you're not super familiar with like different spatial data formats, the blueprint and all its underlying data are what are called rasters. And so a raster is just a spatial data format that depicts the landscape as a grid of small, equally sized squares. And the smaller your square, the finer or the higher the resolution of your data. And each of those squares is called a pixel. So the 30 meter by 30 meter pixel, that's the unit of the blueprint analysis, is roughly 1/4 of an acre in size, if that kind of gives you some context. So what this viewpoint data mode allows you to do is pinpoint a specific area and see how the blueprint is scoring underneath. So let's go ahead and do that together. Once again, it's prompting me to zoom in to select a point. And so as I zoom, and I think I'm going to head for northern Oklahoma here. Once I zoom in close enough, a crosshairs is going to appear on my screen. There it is. And so with this little bullseye, as I move it around, the sidebar is updating to show me information about whatever pixel, whatever point is dead center in that bullseye. And how I'm moving it is I'm taking this little grabby hand and I'm panning the map behind the crosshairs. And then I'm continuing to zoom in a little bit more closely until I find this tall grass prairie preserve that I wanted to show y'all. So at first it's telling me about the blueprint priority level. That's not terribly thrilling because that's very clear from the legend. But as we move forward, it starts to show us things that are more interesting. So in the hub and corridor section, it's telling me that underneath this pixel in the blueprint is a hub. So this is a super important area for connectivity. Then I can flip over to indicators and see a lot more information than what I could see at a glance in summary mode. And that's because in any one given pixel, you can only have one score for a particular indicator. So we can do more than just tell us, is it present or not? It can tell us how is it scoring. And so right away, I can see that there's some interesting stuff going on here. We've got some high values for amphibians. We're in a likely grassland and savanna. I'm in a tall grass prairie preserve. I would expect that. A pretty natural landscape. And any one of these indicators that I'm interested in learning more about, I can click on it. And so it's telling me that the pixel, the point in the middle of this crosshairs scores slightly more resilient on our resilient terrestrial sites indicator. This data comes from the Nature Conservancy's resilient land analysis, and it's looking at, does this site have the necessary geophysical complexity and the connectedness to the surrounding area that's needed to support biodiversity in the face of climate change? Then once again, I can click to view this indicator in the SECAS Atlas. If I scroll down, I'll see our freshwater indicators. Not a lot happening here because we're not in a floodplain, so that's not terribly surprising. I'm going to go to more info, and unfortunately, we don't have the beautiful charts in this point data mode because you only have one pixel value, so we don't have the range of values to summarize, but I can kind of show you how this works. So this is telling me that in the middle of this preserve, it's a protected area, so it's not surprising, not likely to urbanize. But if I head down here to Pasca, I can see some areas that do have a risk of urbanization or are currently already urban. We're in northern Oklahoma. Nothing is happening for sea level rise here. Wildfire likelihood, if I go back to the preserve, you can kind of see how that likelihood score varies as I move the cursor around. Conserved areas ownership, this is back to that protected land stuff. You can see, we're in nonprofit owned lands because this is the TNC preserve. If I scoot over here, I'll pick up some state lands, and the protection status, this is just gap status from the protected areas database, will vary as well. And then this is now showing me the name of the protected area as it appears in PAD US. Oh, the other thing I should have mentioned is that once again, in response to user feedback, we've added the coordinates. So this is telling you the coordinate of the site that is dead center in that bullseye that you are learning about in the sidebar. That is pixel mode in a nutshell, or point data mode. I'm trying to retrain myself. And then I'm going to move us over to the last mode I want to demonstrate, which is filtering. And this is a function that was really built based on user demand. So people wanted the viewer to help them find their piece of the blueprint. This is a big regional strategy, and there are a lot of purple things on this map. And what are the purple things that align with my mission, my vision, my goals, or the question that I want to answer? And this mode is designed to help you do that. So essentially the way it works is we have a series of filters that we can turn on and off and configure on the left. The filters that are available to you are basically the blueprint priorities, the hubs and corridors, all of the indicators, and some of those more info layers like urban growth and sea level rise. And then the map is going to update to respond and show the parts of the blueprint that meet the criteria you set on the left. One thing to understand off the bat is the filters that are available to you depend on the area you're zoomed into. So right now I'm in the continental Southeast, and I do not see any Caribbean indicators here to filter by because it doesn't apply to the area I'm looking at. If I scoot over to Puerto Rico and USVI, you'll see that the filters that are available change. And now I'm seeing the Caribbean indicators. And I haven't done a live demo in this area yet, so let me go ahead and show you this next example over here in the Caribbean. So we're going to start really simple. Maybe I just want to see the part of the blueprint that's in the highest priority class. And to do that, I will turn on this filter and then uncheck the other priority classes so that I'm only looking at highest priority. Once again, this is a very different interface than what I showed 2 years ago on our last live demo, where we've moved to these checkboxes instead of those sort of confusing slider bars. So hopefully this will make a little bit more sense to you. If I am done with this filter, I can always just click reset. Maybe I want to filter by the hubs and corridors, just find the part of the blueprint that scores highly on our connectivity analysis. I can turn on that filter, and then maybe I just want to see the hubs. I can uncheck the corridors, so now I'm only seeing the part of the blueprint that is in a hub. If you're an overachiever, you may already be jumping to, but can I mix and match filters? And the answer is yes, you can. But I first want to explain how the different filters work together. So the filters in the Explorer are what we call and filters as opposed to or filters. And that means that if I'm using two filters in combination, it is going to show me the part of the blueprint that scores in highest priority and is in a hub, not the part of the blueprint that's in either of the two. It has to be both. And so the way I like to think about this is as if I were, say, shopping for a new pair of hiking boots on some sort of online retailer. I might want to configure my search results by selecting that my type of shoe is hiking boot and I want it to be waterproof and I want it to be in my size. Well, I want to only see results that meet all of my criteria. If it was showing me results that only met one of my criteria, I'd also be seeing high heels and I'd be seeing things that aren't in my size, and I don't want that. So the filters in the Explorer work in that exact same way. So I'm going to go ahead and reset these filters. One thing to be aware of, especially in the continental United States, is that it is possible to choose filters that have no overlap. And if you do that, you are going to see a blank map. Let me show you how that works. So some of our indicators are what we call sub-regional. They only cover a fraction of the SECAS geography. One of those is East Coastal Plain open pine birds. If I turn on this filter, it's already just selecting places that are some level of priority for open pine birds in the East Coastal Plain. Now, if I go down to playas only occur in the Great Plains geography. So if I turn on this filter, my map goes blank because there are no areas within the blueprint or otherwise that are in both the Great Plains and the East Coastal Plain. So just be aware that if you're messing with filters, you get a blank map. That could be what has happened. Just be a little bit deliberate about the filters that you're combining. So let me show you how it can actually work really well to combine filters. So let's say that I want to do some riparian buffer restoration, and I want to find the part of the blueprint that's the best candidate for that type of conservation action. I can turn on the natural land cover in floodplains indicator, and that's already filtering me to the floodplain because that's the area that this indicator applies to. But I probably don't want to do restoration in some place that's already receiving the highest score on this indicator. It probably doesn't need that much help. So I'm going to narrow the blueprint down to just the part that scores within this sort of restorable range on this indicator. But maybe that's not enough for me. So maybe I'm in the Mississippi alluvial valley and I want my riparian buffer work to be targeted toward like bottomland hardwood restoration to benefit interior forest breeding birds. So I can add that filter by turning it on. Now, right away, it's zoomed me to the Mississippi alluvial valley and filtered out everything else because that's where this indicator applies. And this actually isn't enough for me because I don't want to do restoration in places that are least likely to benefit birds. I want to do it just in the most likely places. So I'm going to uncheck everything else. And now you see more and more of the blueprints disappeared as I'm being more and more selective. And so I've been quite targeted here, and I've really limited that part of the blueprint that I'm seeing. But if this is the type of thing you're trying to do, find your piece that really aligns with your specific action, this can be very helpful. And an interesting thing is that the point data and the filtering are built on the same data stack. They kind of have the same back-end structure, and it means you can move seamlessly back and forth between them. So once you've narrowed down the part of the blueprint that you want to see, you can then hop back over to view point data and start to learn more about these areas that you've pinpointed. I think I have one more feature that I want to show you. And this is almost kind of a secret Easter egg that our software developer built for staff, and we loved it so much that we decided to put it in the public viewer. But we don't kind of draw a huge amount of attention to it because it does add a little bit of complexity. And it's this button here on the right that has 3 stacked layers. So if you click this, it's saying you can choose what layer you want to show on the map. And so you can now see layers that are not the blueprint if you want to. So let's look at what that looks like. I can turn on hubs and corridors. We've been talking a lot about that. So here's the map of hubs and corridors. Maybe we want to look at urban growth. I'll scroll down to the more information here at the bottom, turn on urban growth, and now you can see those futures projections. Something that's really powerful, but can also be a little confusing, is that you can combine the filters with the view of other layers. So as you can see, this little button is only present in filtering, point data. It disappears in summary mode because summary mode has a totally different data structure and it doesn't play nice with this button. So if you're in either of these 2 modes, you can mess with this layers button. It can do some pretty cool things. Let me sort of show you how that works. So if I go over to filtering, maybe I want to filter the blueprint to just show places that are vulnerable to sea level rise at up to 10 feet. So I'm going to turn on this sea level rise filter, and I'm going to configure it. I don't want to see places that are already flooded at high tide, and I don't want to see places that are not going to be impacted by sea level rise or where no data is available. So I'm going to uncheck those. So this is just the part of the sea level rise projections I want to see. But maybe I want to narrow it further. I want to see places that are predicted to be impacted by sea level rise, but also resilient to its impacts. And I can do that maybe by turning on our resilient coastal sites indicator filter. So once I click that, you can see that it's limiting less and less of the blueprint to show on the map. But I want to just look at the places that are more resilient. I'm seeing the full range of resilient scores. So I'm going to uncheck all these average and below scores. So now I'm seeing places that are going to be impacted by sea level rise and have above average resilience. But perhaps I don't want to see the blueprint. I want to see how the resilience scores vary in this area of South Florida. So I can go over here, and instead of the blueprint, I can turn on resilient coastal sites. So now I can kind of see, okay, we have a lot of green here. It's sort of different shades of green. What shades of green do we have? I'm going to switch over to view point data and to the indicators tab and click on, I've whizzed past it, I think. Here's resilient coastal sites. So I can kind of see how the resilient coastal site score vary using pixel data, which is kind of cool. So this is an example of how viewing another layer can be helpful. It's also possible to get some pretty crazy combinations. So just be thoughtful. And if you find that you've gotten yourself totally in over your head, which I've done a couple times, you can always turn the blueprint back on. You can clear your filters, or if you're really at your wit's end, just refresh the viewer. Clean slate, no big deal. So that's pretty much what I wanted to showcase in terms of a live demo. And I see that I have talked for quite some time. So I am going to go ahead and cut this off and ask for questions. We can probably take about 5 minutes of questions if anyone would like to ask anything. Please feel free to use the chat or just raise your hand and pop yourself off mute.
There's a question in the Q&A, Hilary, from Lynette Brown. She says if a shapefile is uploaded, is it or the generated report stored in any way? Concerned about confidentiality.
Thank you. Thanks, Yvonne, for watching that. The Q&A is kind of new with this webinar format. I'm used to watching the chat, but not the Q&A. It is not stored. It's totally deleted off the server very quickly. So it's not something that we're keeping a record of. And actually, that's super important, like, because this is a tool that's been built with federal investment and is on kind of a secure federal cloud. Like, we have to be incredibly careful not to collect any type of personal information or confidential information. So this is something we've been very deliberate to not collect anything about you, not keep your files in any way. So you can be confident that we're not holding on to that. Actually, while we're talking about the reports, I'll mention that's something I failed to highlight. We did update a fair amount in response to user feedback. We've kind of reconfigured the way the analysis works so that it can take much larger areas and more complex geographies, but we've still sort of been fine-tuning what's that balance of the biggest file the server can handle without getting overwhelmed and then kind of getting stuck. So if you ever find that you're uploading a shapefile and it gives you an error, says it's too big, or anything like that, please just reach out to user support, and we have some workarounds where we can run a version of that report for you locally that doesn't tie up the server. So that's always an option as well.
There's another one in the Q&A.
Thanks, Yvonne. Are critical habitat or proposed critical habitat looked at for linkages? What about special features such as karst, cave springs, or spring sheds? How would we have special species areas such as manatee be highlighted within this map? So the way the corridors work and those linkages, which I think are what you're asking about, they're basically looking to move across the shortest distance possible between our hubs while also moving through as much blueprint priority as possible. So we're trying to ensure that they're short, efficient connections for species to move, but also that they're moving through high quality habitat. We don't have specifically critical habitat or proposed habitat as part of the corridor routing. It's just more about the indicator score and the priorities within the blueprint. But that is something that we could definitely look at as we explore ways to improve our corridor methods in the future. One thing we've been talking a lot about lately as a staff is how we improve the alignment of the corridors in the blueprint with existing corridor efforts, like things Florida Wildlife Corridor, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation has corridors that they identify. So it would be great if we could get the blueprint corridors to align with the other things that people care about, and critical habitat could be something that we look at. If you want to create a map that has another layer on it, you can either upload the manatee areas to the report feature and generate a custom report, or user support could help you make a custom map that adds a bunch of additional data on it. You could also potentially make a map in our hub if you have those manatee areas on ArcGIS Online. You could sort of create a map by overlaying different map services in the ArcGIS Online environment. I see Amy's hand, and she's our corridor guru, so she may have some ideas on how to respond to that too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you did such a great job answering that, Hilary. So if there is also an indicator that included critical habitat, then that would be another way that it could influence the corridors. And off the top of my head, I'm trying to think if I can think of all of them. I do think Gulf migratory fish includes critical habitat for sturgeon. There might be another indicator that has that. So that's another route that could influence the corridors using critical habitat, is by getting them in indicators where they're applicable.
That's a great point. We do, the only other one I can think of is just for islands. We have an indicator of island habitat that looks at critical habitat for island dwelling species. But yeah, we could definitely expand the ways that we use critical habitat within our indicators as well. Thank you for pointing that out. But Maina, if you would like some help, like making a map with some manatee stuff, please feel free to reach out to me. I know we've been corresponding about Crystal River a little bit, so happy to help with that if I can. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with a quick update from staff, and then I'll pause again for questions at the end. Let me share my screen. So here's what to expect from next month's web forum. That'll be March 20th, same time as today, but we will have a different link. So as I mentioned on last month's webinar, we also put a blog in the newsletter about this as well. We've moved to requiring registration for these webinars, as you clearly know, because you made it here today. So each web forum is now going to have a unique link that you can register for, and I will put that in the chat, link to next month's web forum. So the next web forum is going to be focused on developing the Eastern Grouse Conservation Plan. We're going to be hearing from Zach Danks, who's the Turkey Grouse Program Coordinator for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. And so I think that's going to be a really great talk. This is an example of really cross-regional and actually international collaboration on conserving the eastern grouse. There's an eastern grouse working group that has developed this great new plan for the eastern grouse. I'm sorry, my screen's all over the place. I'm trying to get back to my Teams meeting. It's hard when I'm trying to multitask. Here's that link to register for next month. So that'll be a really great talk. Definitely tune into that. A quick update from your staff. We do have an opportunity to sign up for some indicator review teams. So this is something that we do when we're developing new or overhauling some indicators that go into the blueprint. We're already hard at work on the Blueprint 2025 update as part of that lean startup revision cycle that I mentioned. So we're going to have two indicators that are open for review this year. One is grasslands and savannas. We had a team for this last year as well, but we're making some additional improvements to this indicator this year. And then we also are going to have a couple of new indicators that we're developing for imperiled mammals and imperiled reptiles and amphibians. And this is using species on the regional species of greatest conservation need list and looking at places that have high biodiversity for these different taxa. So those are going to be some great opportunities to really get involved in the development of the blueprint. If you would like to weigh in, we'd love to have all of our experts giving us feedback. So I'm going to put these links in the chat as well, that this is imperiled species. And then with that, I always like to end on this slide, how to get more involved in SECAS. If you sign up for the SECAS newsletter, which you can do on the footer of any page of our website, you'll get a monthly reminder email about this web forum and a monthly newsletter that includes updates from your staff and other folks in the conservation community. You can, of course, always connect with your SECAS staff and other partners involved in the partnership. You can see who those folks are and our contact information on the SECAS webpage as well. And then obviously, we'd love for you to explore the blueprint and let us know how it's working for you. Let us know if we can help you apply the blueprint to your work in some way. We'd love to hear how we can be of assistance. And so with that, I will just pause for questions again and see if anybody else has anything in our last minute. I don't mind hanging on if there are a couple more questions. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Any other questions? It was great to see everybody. Hope to see you in March. Have a great rest of your week. Bye, y'all.